So Kaori, I do hear people talking about waiving contingencies when they write offers.
Yes.
What's your take on that?
So, I mean, I see it all the time, Sean, and it's actually kind of scary to me because we do not recommend it to our clients, especially on the appraisal contingency. Right now, our market is just inflated, right? All the prices are just skyrocketing. You know, I just pulled the median price for last month in April, and we're up at 375,000.
Wow.
We're getting close to the 400 mark.
Yeah.
You know,
We were just at 350 like a few months ago.
Exactly. So with that being said, all the appraisers are coming in lower than the list price. So what happens? As a lender, right, you could only cover the appraised amount.
Correct. We're only going to lend up to that amount, and then obviously if the appraisal came in short, we have to make up that difference somehow, whether it's the seller dropping the price, the seller and the buyer maybe meeting in the middle, or the buyer covering the difference.
Right, and in the seller's market, guys, what happens? The seller is not going to take that, that loss, right? So the buyers usually have to cover that difference. And what happens if the appraiser, gap is, 25, 50 grand difference? I mean, it'll be fine.
Seen some 50,000. Yeah.
You've seen it, right?
Yeah.
So obviously for buyers that have the cash and the capability to cover that, that's okay, but most of us don't.
Right.
So in that case, what happens? The deal, it doesn't go through. So for us, we don't. And what we've been kind of, playing around with numbers. Obviously, we do all of our homework. We run the comps and really analyze it. At the same time, we also recommend, it ultimately depends how much the buyer wants the house, right? Like, are you really in love with this house? Can you walk away with it? If they absolutely love it, we could talk about maybe putting a cap to the appraised difference. So we've had a scenario where we basically put a cap of 10 or 15,000. If it's below the appraised value, that's how much my buyers are willing to cover. But anything above that, we need to have a discussion.
Have to negotiate. Yeah. And I think one thing for people to remember too, those contingencies are there to protect you as the buyer. So, waiving them, you're almost in essence, kind of putting yourself up for risk. So that's why, obviously working with your agent, making sure you understand the contract. I think a lot of times, even on our side, on the lender, not a lot of buyers understand what they're signing. And, those contingency dates, they're hard coded into the contract, right? Like once you pass that date, it automatically, I think you have to move past, right? And you can't go back and say, hey, well, I want to back out now, kind of thing. So I think even as a lender, advising people too is just, understand what you're signing, because once you're in contract, we're all working towards certain dates and things move fast. Correct.
And then we've also seen the due diligence period. We usually put in our offer letter 14 days, that's 2 weeks, plenty of time for inspection, going back and forth with requests for repairs if we have to. A lot of the sellers are shortening that time frame, so they're asking for 7 days. And sometimes, for us, we could work really quickly, but some people, some of our buyers from out of town, they might want to fly in for that due diligence period. So are they able to do that in such a quick turnaround? Yes and no, it depends.
So in your due diligence, what do you guys typically cover in that time frame?
Absolutely. So we cover the inspection. So that's the first thing. So for me, like once we're in escrow, the next day I have the inspector there. First thing in the morning, they'll go through the inspection of the house. I'm usually there as well. And typically it takes about an hour or 2 hours depending on the size of the house. And basically the inspector goes through everything, right? And then we'll get an inspection report at the end of the day that I will go over with my buyer. And there'll be a list of obviously, suggestions, right? And we'll go over that. Some are cosmetic that, a handyman can easily fix. So usually we don't really talk about those for the request for repair, but more the structural, if there's a water leak, any of those big repair, we make sure we put it on the request for repair.
What about during that inspection period? Let's say there's something major with the house. Can the buyer get their earnest money back? Because I know a lot of times people feel, when they wire a few $1,000s in, how difficult is that for them to get their money back? Because I think that's one thing a lot of people struggle with too. Yeah,
so within the due diligence period, you could get your earnest money back 100%.
That's why it's super important, right? To move fast.
Yes.
Again, the communication piece
Yes.
with your agent, so that way you guys can get that done.
Absolutely. So, once we submit the request for repair, the seller will look at it. They'll let us know if they're going to cover all of it or some of it. Sometimes it could be a credit amount. Sometimes we kind of use that as a leverage. If we wanted some of their furniture, instead of the repairs, we want your beautiful sofa in the living room. Like, we have some kind of compromise.
Got to be creative, right?
Got to be creative. So whenever I tell my clients when we're doing a showing of a house, I always tell them, make a note of the things you like about the house, including furniture. Oh, they have a nice wine fridge. They have a nice, what have you, a rocking chair, like whatever,
fan or something,
fan,
right?
whatever it may be. Make a note of that, because we could always use that to leverage when we're negotiating.